Princess Eliera stood at the edge of the royal garden, her iridescent scales catching the light of both moons. The night air was cool against her face as she gazed up at the stars, wondering which one might hold her future mate. So far, none had come forward. "Your Highness, the Queen requests your presence." The voice of her attendant, Mira, broke her thoughts. Eliera nodded and followed, her long ceremonial robes trailing behind her. The great hall was filled with dignitaries from across the galaxy, all gathered for the Claiming Festival, a tradition that had served the Vesperi Empire for thousands of years. Yet this was the third such festival held in her honor. And still, no suitor had stepped forward. Queen Telia, her mother, sat upon the crystal throne. Her massive form commanded respect from all who entered the hall. Unlike Eliera's smaller, more delicate frame, the queen had reached her full mature size, nearly twice as tall as the princess and considerably more intimidating. "Approach, daughter," the queen's voice echoed. Eliera moved forward, keeping her forearms positioned in the formal stance of respect. The hall fell silent. "The festival concludes tomorrow. Have any shown interest?" the queen asked, though they both knew the answer. "None, Mother Queen," Eliera replied, her voice steady despite the shame that burned within her. A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was unprecedented in royal history. Always, there had been eager suitors from powerful families across the stars. Always, until Eliera. The queen dismissed her with a wave, and Eliera retreated to the side of the hall. Ambassador Dorn, from the neighboring Trell Collective, approached her with false sympathy. "Perhaps next year, Princess," he said, his multiple eyes blinking in sequence. "The right match will appear." Eliera knew better. It wasn't her beauty that kept suitors away. Her sleek form and brilliant plumage were considered exceptional, even by Vesperi standards. It wasn't her intelligence, which had been celebrated by the royal scholars. It wasn't even her bloodline, which was impeccable. It was the fate that awaited any who claimed her. Later, in her private chambers, Mira helped remove her formal attire. "They fear what they don't understand," Mira said softly. Eliera sighed. "They understand perfectly well. Our biology is no secret. The universe knew that Vesperi queens consumed their mates after producing offspring. It was natural, necessary. The male's body provided critical nutrients for the developing eggs. Without this sacrifice, the next generation would not survive. For centuries, this had been considered an honor. Males from the highest houses across the galaxy had competed for the privilege of royal consummation, seeing it as the ultimate sacrifice for power and position. Their families gained prestigious alliances with the Vesperi Empire, and their genetic line continued through royal offspring. But times had changed. Modern species had grown attached to concepts like survival and equality. The old ways were increasingly viewed as barbaric rather than sacred. "The council meeting is tomorrow," Eliera said, moving to her window. Father would have known what to do. Her father had been consumed before she was old enough to remember him. All she knew were the stories of his bravery, his willingness to give everything for the Empire. "Your Highness," Mira hesitated, "there are rumors that the Queen may consider alternative arrangements." Eliera turned sharply. "What alternatives? Our biology doesn't allow for alternatives. The humans have joined the Galactic Council. They're primitive, but their embassy arrives tomorrow." Eliera had heard of humans, a curious species from a small blue world at the edge of the galaxy. New to space travel, eager to prove themselves. "Humans," she repeated. "What could they possibly offer?" Mira shrugged her upper arms. "I don't know, but they're different. Perhaps different is what we need." That night, Eliera couldn't sleep. Part of her felt relief that no one had claimed her. She had never wanted to harm another being. Yet another part felt the weight of her failure. Without a mate, there would be no heir. Without an heir, the ancient line would end with her. As dawn broke over the crystal spires of the palace, Eliera made a decision. She would attend the human embassy's arrival herself. After all, What did she have to lose? Jack Miller adjusted his collar nervously as the Earth diplomatic shuttle docked at the Vesperi Royal Spaceport. Through the viewport, he could see the towering crystal structures that made up the alien capital city. Sunlight bounced off them in rainbow patterns that almost hurt his eyes. "Remember the protocol," Ambassador Reed reminded the team. "The Vesperi value formality. No sudden movements with your hands. No direct eye contact with the Queen. And for heaven's sake, don't mention their mating habits." Jack nodded. As a junior diplomat on his first off-world mission, he had studied the briefing materials extensively. Earth had only joined the Galactic Council 3 months ago, and everyone knew how important this meeting was. The landing ramp extended with a hiss, and the team walked out into the strange, sweet-smelling air of the Vesperi homeworld. A line of tall, iridescent beings waited to greet them. Their 4 arms were positioned in what Jack recognized as a formal welcome stance. "Greetings, Earth delegation," said the lead Vesperi in surprisingly clear English. "I am Minister Kelth. The Queen awaits you in the Grand Hall." The humans followed their hosts through massive doorways designed for beings much taller than themselves. Jack tried not to stare at the incredible architecture or the exotic guards with their crystalline weapons. The formal reception was long and filled with speeches about cooperation and new beginnings. Jack stood at attention for hours, his legs growing stiff. When there was finally a break in the ceremonies, Ambassador Reed pulled him aside. "They're serving some kind of refreshments. I need you to analyze them with your kit before anyone eats anything." Jack slipped away with his small testing device. Looking for somewhere private to examine the strange purple fruits being offered, he turned down a quiet corridor. The hallway led to an open doorway that revealed a stunning garden filled with plants unlike any he had seen on Earth. "Oh wow," he whispered, momentarily forgetting his task. Stepping into the garden, he was struck by flowers that seemed to glow from within and trees with bark, like polished metal. "You should not be here," a voice said from behind a curtain of hanging blue vines. Jack jumped. "I'm sorry. I got lost and—" A figure stepped forward, and Jack's words died in his throat. She was smaller than the other Vesperi he had seen, with scales that shifted between blue and purple in the light. Unlike the formal robes of the officials, she wore simpler clothes that reminded him of flowing water. "You're human," she said, sounding more curious than angry. "Yes, Jack Miller, junior diplomatic officer." He gave a small bow, remembering his training. "I apologize for intruding. I'll leave right away." "No," she said quickly. "Please stay. I've never met a human before." Relieved he wasn't in trouble, Jack relaxed slightly. "And I'd never met a—" He trailed off, realizing he didn't know how to address her. "I am Eliara," she said simply, not offering any title. "This garden is beautiful, Eliara. We have nothing like these plants on Earth." She moved closer, studying him with large, faceted eyes. "Tell me about Earth plants." Jack found himself describing oak trees and roses, desert cacti, and rainforest vines. Eliara listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that revealed an intelligent mind. "Your world sounds so different," she said, "yet you speak of it with such love. Don't you feel that way about your home?" Eliara looked up at the crystal towers visible beyond the garden walls. "I love my people and our history, but sometimes our traditions feel heavy." Jack nodded, understanding more than she realized. Traditions can be both beautiful and difficult. On Earth, we're constantly trying to balance holding onto our past while moving forward. Their conversation flowed easily, neither noticing the time passing. Jack felt comfortable with Eliara in a way he rarely did with new people, let alone aliens. From the shadows of a high balcony, Queen Talia watched the pair. Her royal advisor stood nervously at her side. "Interesting," the Queen said quietly. "Look how freely they speak." "Your Majesty, should I remove the human from the royal garden?" The Queen continued watching as her daughter laughed at something the small human said. "No," she decided. I believe we may have found a solution to our problem." Ambassador Reed was furious. "You wandered off during a critical diplomatic function to chat with an alien in a garden." His face had turned an alarming shade of red. "Sir, I was just," Jack began, but was cut off by a Vesperi royal messenger entering the Earth delegation's quarters. "The Queen requests the presence of the human called Jack Miller," the messenger announced, 4 arms positioned in a formal gesture. Reed's anger turned to surprise, then suspicion. Why would the Queen ask for our junior diplomat? The messenger simply bowed. "It is not my place to question the Queen's wishes." 20 minutes later, Jack found himself walking through the towering halls of the royal palace. Guards with shimmering armor flanked him on both sides. They arrived at a massive door made of something that looked like mother of pearl, but was harder than steel. "Enter," commanded a powerful voice from within. The throne room took Jack's breath away. Ceiling so high it disappeared into shadows. Walls that seemed to be made of living crystal. And there, on a raised platform, sat the most intimidating being Jack had ever seen. Queen Talia of the Vesperi was nearly 15 feet tall, her exoskeleton a deep royal purple. The 4 arms of her species were longer and stronger on her massive frame, adorned with ceremonial markings. Her eyes, all 6 of them, focused directly on Jack. With a shock, he recognized the smaller figure standing beside the throne. It was Eliara from the garden. But now she wore elaborate royal dress, and her posture was formal and stiff. "Jack Miller of Earth," the Queen's voice rumbled through the chamber. "Do you know who you spoke with yesterday?" Jack swallowed hard. "I believe I've made a serious error, Your Majesty. I didn't realize. You spoke with Princess Eliara, my daughter and heir to the Vesperi Empire." Jack felt the blood drain from his face. He had casually chatted with alien royalty about Earth plants and complained about his boss. This was a diplomatic disaster. "I apologize profoundly for my disrespect, Your Majesty. And to you, Princess." He bowed deeply. Unexpectedly, the Queen made a sound that might have been laughter. "Disrespect. You showed my daughter more genuine interest than any royal suitor has in 3 festivals." Jack remained silent, confused about where this was going. "Our researchers have been studying your species since your arrival," the Queen continued. "Humans possess remarkable regenerative properties. Your cells divide and repair in ways ours do not." Jack nodded slowly. "Yes, though we're still quite fragile compared to many species." "Perhaps," the Queen said, "but you might survive what others cannot." A strange silence filled the room. Jack noticed Eliara looking intensely at him, her expression unreadable. "I propose an alliance between our empires," the Queen declared, "through marriage." Jack blinked. "Marriage? Between you and Princess Eliara." The guards shifted uncomfortably. Even they seemed shocked by this proposal. "Your Majesty," Jack said carefully, "I'm deeply honored, but I'm not authorized to agree to such an arrangement. This would require approval from Earth's highest councils." "Of course," the Queen nodded. "Your leaders will be contacted. But I wish to speak with you directly, as you would bear the greatest burden of this arrangement." Now Jack understood. The burden was the famous Vesperi mating ritual, the one that ended with the male being consumed. "Our scientists believe," the Queen continued, "that a human might survive the process. Your cells could regenerate what our males cannot." Jack looked at Eliara, who finally spoke. "It was not my idea," she said softly. "I would never ask this of you." Something in her voice touched Jack. He realized she was as trapped by tradition as he was by duty. "I need time to consider this," Jack said finally. 3 days, the Queen agreed. "And you may speak privately with my daughter to make your decision." As Jack was escorted out, his mind raced. Earth would gain unprecedented access to Vesperi technology and alliance with one of the galaxy's oldest empires. But at what personal cost? Later that evening, a message arrived at his quarters. "Meet me in the garden." The Earth embassy buzzed with frantic activity. Officials from every department huddled around screens, arguing about the Queen's proposal. Ambassador Reed paced the room, his face grim. "This is either the greatest diplomatic opportunity in human history or a death sentence for Miller," he muttered. Jack sat quietly in the corner, ignored by the senior staff as they debated his fate. His personal communicator vibrated with the 20th message from Earth Command. Everyone wanted details, explanations, assurances. "I'm going for a walk," he announced to no one in particular, slipping out while the ambassador was distracted. The royal garden was peaceful in the light of the setting sun. Iliara waited by a fountain where water flowed upward instead of down, defying Earth physics. "Your people are upset," she said as he approached. Jack smiled wearily. "That's putting it mildly. Yours? The royal court is divided. Many see you as too primitive for a royal match. Others are desperate for any solution to continue our line." She gestured for him to sit beside her. "My combat trainer thinks I've lost my mind." Combat trainer. Iliara's scales rippled in what Jack now recognized as amusement. "Vesperi princesses are warriors first, diplomats second. I could break you in half, you know." "That's reassuring, considering what we're discussing." Jack laughed nervously. Their conversation shifted to their respective cultures. Jack explained human concepts of marriage as partnership rather than hierarchy. Iliara described the complex honor systems that had governed Vesperi mating for millennia. In the ancient days, she explained, males fought for the right to be chosen. Their sacrifice meant their genetic line continued through royal offspring. Their families gained status and power. "But now no one volunteers," Jack observed. "The galaxy has changed. Other species value individual survival over genetic legacy." She looked down. "I don't blame them." Jack studied her face. "You don't want to harm anyone, do you?" "No," she admitted quietly. "I've always dreaded this part of becoming queen." Their daily meetings continued as both societies erupted in conflict over the proposed union. Earth scientists demanded more data on human regenerative capabilities in alien biological systems. Vesperi traditionalists protested the potential dilution of royal bloodlines. On the third day, Ambassador Reed cornered Jack before he could leave for the garden. "Earth Command has authorized the marriage," he said without preamble. Jack stared at him. "Just like that? They're willing to risk my life." Reed had the decency to look uncomfortable. "The potential scientific and diplomatic benefits are substantial, but they stress this must be your choice." "How generous of them," Jack said bitterly. "There's more," Reed continued. "The Vesperi royal physicians have proposed modifications to their traditional process. They believe with certain adaptations, your survival chances increase to nearly 40%. 40%. Wonderful odds." In the garden, Jack found Iliara practicing combat forms with her 4 arms moving in perfect coordination. She stopped when she saw him. "You've heard the news," she said, reading his expression. "Yes. Earth says yes, assuming I agree." He sat heavily on a stone bench. "Your mother must be pleased." Iliara joined him. "My mother sees political advantage. She doesn't see you as a person." "And how do you see me?" Jack asked. She was quiet for a long moment. "As someone who listens when I speak, as someone who shows me respect not because of my title, but because of who I am." Her voice softened. "As someone I don't want to lose." Something shifted between them in that moment. Beyond politics, beyond biology, beyond duty. "I found something," Iliara said suddenly, producing an ancient-looking tablet. "It's from our historical archives. There are references to alternative rituals from before the Great Unification, ceremonies that allowed royal mates to survive." Jack took the tablet carefully. "Why hasn't anyone mentioned this before?" "Because it would mean changing tradition. And on Vesperi, tradition is everything." She looked at him intently. "But perhaps it's time for change." As they bent over the ancient text together, neither noticed the royal spy watching from behind the luminous trees. recording every word for the Queen. The Vesperi Royal Medical Chamber was unlike any hospital Jack had ever seen. Instead of beds, there were suspension pods filled with clear gel. Instead of doctors in white coats, blue-scale technicians with specialized tools attached to their forearms moved efficiently through the room. Dr. Neela, the head royal physician, had Jack lie in a scanning chamber. Her large compound eyes blinked in sequence as she studied the results. "Fascinating," she murmured. "Truly fascinating." Jack tried to remain calm. "What's fascinating?" "Your cellular structure. When damaged, your cells don't just repair. They remember their original pattern." She showed him a screen where his blood cells were rapidly dividing after being deliberately damaged. No Vesperi male could do this. Ambassador Reed shifted nervously beside Jack. "And what are the implications for the mating process?" Dr. Neela's upper arms made a complex gesture that Jack had learned meant possibility. "The Queen's theory appears correct. Unlike our males, whose bodies are completely consumed, a human might survive if enough vital tissue remains intact." She turned to Jack. "You would be severely injured, but your body could potentially regenerate over time." "Potentially," Jack repeated. "What are the actual odds?" "With standard protocol, perhaps 20%. With modifications based on your unique biology, closer to 60%. Reed looked relieved. "That's better than we calculated." Jack shot him an annoyed look. "It's still a 40% chance of death." "There's something else," Dr. Neela said, bringing up ancient text on her screen. "Princess Eliera shared some historical documents with me." Jack recognized the tablet Eliera had shown him in the garden. "Our ancestors practiced a different ritual," Dr. Neela explained. "The royal mate would offer only part of himself, typically blood and specific tissues, rather than complete consumption." Reed leaned forward eagerly. "And this would increase survival rates significantly, perhaps to 90%. Dr. Neela's voice softened. "But this knowledge has been suppressed for generations. The traditionalists believe the complete sacrifice is necessary for strong offspring." "Is it?" Jack asked. "Modern science suggests otherwise." The ceremonial consumption was more symbolic than biological. The princess would still receive the necessary genetic material and nutrients through a partial offering. Later, as Jack and Reed returned to the Earth Embassy, the ambassador couldn't contain his excitement. "This is incredible, Miller. Not only could this alliance secure Earth's position in the Galactic Council, but you could actually survive the process." He clapped Jack on the shoulder. "You'll be a hero." Jack remained quiet. The improving odds were reassuring, but something else weighed on his mind. That evening, Eliera met him in their garden, now their regular meeting place. She looked troubled. "My mother knows about the ancient texts," she said without greeting. "Someone reported our conversation." Jack felt a chill. "Is that bad?" "The Royal Council is divided. Half see it as a promising solution. The other half call it heresy." Her scales had dulled, a sign of stress Jack had learned to recognize. "There are those who would rather see our line end than change tradition." Jack took her upper hand carefully, a gesture that had become comfortable between them. "What do you want, Eliera?" "Not your mother, not your council. You." She looked at him with eyes that reflected the twin moons. "I want you to live, Jack. I've lost too many people to tradition already." There was pain in her voice that made Jack realize she was thinking of her father, the previous royal consort who had been consumed before she could know him. "The medical tests today were encouraging," he told her. "Dr. Neela thinks with the modified ritual, I could survive." Hope flickered across Eliera's face. "You would still consider this, even knowing the risks?" Jack hadn't planned to say what came next, but he realized it was true as the words left his mouth. "I would risk it. Not for Earth, not for politics, but for you." Something changed in Eliera's eyes. She moved closer, her face inches from his. "In my culture," she whispered, "we do not have your concept of love. We have duty, honor, sacrifice. But what I feel for you, I think it might be what humans call love." Jack knew then that no matter what the odds, he had already made his decision. The day of the royal union arrived with 3 suns aligned in the Vesperi sky, a rare event considered highly fortunate. The capital city gleamed with decorations, though Jack noticed the celebrations seemed subdued. Many Vesperi still viewed this union with uncertainty. Inside the palace, Jack stood before a mirror as attendants fitted him with traditional consort garments. The outfit was beautiful but strange, a mix of metallic fabric and living crystal that shifted colors with his movements. Ambassador Reed entered the chamber, looking unusually solemn. "Final security sweep is complete," he said. "We've detected 3 separate threats already." Jack nodded. The political divisions had grown violent in recent days. Traditionalists viewed him as a corruption of sacred rites. Some human groups protested what they called his sacrifice. "The Earth security team will be with you until the private ceremony begins," Reed continued. After that, I'm in the hands of fate," Jack finished. Reed placed a small device on Jack's wrist. "Emergency beacon. If anything goes wrong, anything at all, press this." Jack smiled thinly. By then it might be too late. The grand ceremony began at midday in the Crystal Cathedral, a massive structure that amplified sound so perfectly that whispers from the front could be heard in the back. Thousands of guests filled the space, Vesperi nobles, Earth diplomats, and representatives from across the galaxy. Queen Talia presided, her massive form elevated on the royal platform. As Jack entered from one side of the cathedral, Iliera entered from the other. She looked stunning in royal attire that captured and reflected light in hypnotic patterns. The Queen's voice boomed through the cathedral. "Today marks a new chapter in Vesperi history. Our ancient line joins with humanity's potential." The ceremony blended traditions from both worlds. Jack and Iliera exchanged vows in their respective languages. They shared symbolic foods, Vesperi crystal honey and earth bread. Their hands were bound together with a cord that seemed to glow from within. Throughout it all, Jack remained acutely aware of what would follow. The public ceremony was merely prelude to the private ritual, the true test he would face. As the final blessings were spoken, a commotion erupted at the back of the cathedral. Guards rushed toward the disturbance. "Sacrilege!" someone shouted. "The line must remain pure." A flash of energy cut through the air. Security forces surrounded Jack and Iliera instantly. In the chaos, Jack felt something sharp pierce his arm. Looking down, he saw a small dart protruding from his sleeve. "Poison," he mumbled as his vision began to blur. Earth security rushed him to the medical chamber where Dr. Neela was already prepared. She worked quickly, extracting the poison while Vesperi guards secured the area. A traditionalist faction. Captain Mroll of the Royal Guard explained. "They've been neutralized." When Jack regained full consciousness, Iliera was beside him, her face tight with worry. "We can delay," she said. "After what happened?" "No," Jack interrupted. "If we delay, they win. We do this today." As planned. The private ceremony chamber was ancient, carved from living stone heaped beneath the palace. Only essential personnel were present. Dr. Neela and her medical team, the Queen, and 2 royal witnesses. Iliera approached Jack in simple white garments. "Are you certain?" she asked one final time. Jack nodded. "We've prepared for this. The modified ritual, the regeneration treatments. I'm ready." They entered the inner sanctum together. There, Dr. Neela presented the ceremonial tools, modernized versions of ancient implements. The modified ritual would allow Jack to contribute the necessary biological materials while preserving his essential organs and tissues. As they began, Jack felt a strange calm descend over him. He looked at Iliera, whose eyes never left his. "For our future," she whispered. The ritual was painful but precisely controlled. Jack felt his consciousness fading as his blood and tissues were carefully harvested. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Eliara's face, tears streaming down her scales as she completed her part of the ancient ceremony. Outside the chamber, 2 medical teams stood ready, one Vesperi, one human, prepared to fight for Jack's life once the ritual was complete. Jack opened his eyes to an unfamiliar ceiling. Soft blue light filtered through crystal panels above him. His body felt strange, weak but somehow renewed. He tried to move and felt a gentle pressure on his hand. "Be still," Eliara whispered. "You need more time to heal." Jack turned his head to see her seated beside his recovery pod. Her scales had a new vibrancy, a subtle glow that hadn't been there before. She looked both the same and somehow transformed. "I'm alive," he stated simply. Eliara's eyes, all 6 of them, shimmered with emotion. Yes, the first consort in recorded Vesperi history to survive the royal union. Dr. Neela approached from the other side of the room, her medical scanner humming as she checked Jack's vitals. "Remarkable," she said. "Your body is regenerating at an unprecedented rate. The human cellular response to Vesperi biological compounds is opening entirely new fields of research." Jack tried to sit up, succeeding with Eliara's help. "How long was I unconscious?" 7 days, Eliara answered. "There were moments when we feared we'd lose you." The door slid open as Ambassador Reed entered, looking like he hadn't slept in days. When he saw Jack sitting up, his professional demeanor broke into a genuine smile. "Miller, you stubborn miracle." He approached the pod. "Earth is calling you a hero. The science teams are beside themselves with the medical data." Jack looked down at his body. New scars traced patterns across his skin, already fading thanks to the regenerative treatments. He felt different inside too, as if parts of him had been replaced with something not quite human. "And the political situation?" he asked. Reed's face grew serious. "Mixed. The traditionalists are in shock. They expected to be celebrating your funeral. Some call it a sign from the gods. Others say it's an abomination." "And my mother?" Eliara asked. "The Queen has been surprisingly supportive," Reed replied. "She's already using your successful union to propose new alliances with other worlds." Over the following weeks, Jack regained his strength. The royal apartments became his home, and daily he and Eliara learned more about each other. What had begun as political arrangement deepened into genuine partnership. 3 months after the ceremony, they stood together on the royal balcony overlooking the capital city. Below them, crowds gathered for the announcement festival, a tradition where royal news was shared with the public. Queen Telia joined them, her massive form causing the balcony to creak slightly. "It is time," she said. "The people must be told." Jack squeezed Eliara's hand, their private signal of support. Her body had begun to change in subtle ways that only those closest to her could notice. The Queen stepped forward to address the crowd. "People of Vesperi, honored guests from Earth and beyond. Today we celebrate new life and new traditions." A hush fell over the gathered thousands. Princess Eliara and Consort Jack carry the future of our empire. Royal eggs have been confirmed. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Cheers mingled with confused murmurs. This was unprecedented. A living consort and viable royal offspring. Later, in their private garden, Jack and Eliara sat watching the 3 moons rise. What will they be like? Jack wondered aloud. Our children. Eliara placed his hand on her slightly swollen midsection. The geneticists say they will carry traits from both our species, stronger than typical Vesperi, more adaptable than typical humans. Hybrids, Jack mused. Like our cultures now. She nodded. The old ways are changing. Already, my mother has approved 3 more human Vesperi diplomatic marriages using our modified ritual. And the traditionalists. They cannot argue with success, Eliara said simply. Our children will be proof that evolution is stronger than tradition. As night deepened, scientists from both worlds worked together in laboratories below the palace, studying the miracle of Jack's survival and the unique biology of the developing royal offspring. Diplomatic teams drafted new treaties based on shared medical breakthroughs. And in the royal garden, under alien stars, a human and his princess planned for a future neither of their species had imagined possible. "We've changed everything," Jack said softly. Eliara's scales shimmered in agreement. "No, beloved. Everything was already changing. We simply showed them how to embrace it."